Good morning, everybody. On this date, January 10, in 1776, Common Sense was published, written by Thomas Paine, an Englishman, and it became one of the most powerful explanations of why the Americans should be independent. Here's an active urban scene in England in the 1700s, and Thomas Paine was part of that. Lots of new ideas were going through England in the mid-1700s. He was born in 1737. We think he was involved in local government and was quite current with new political ideas, and this will go into his writing. He also loved the cities. He loved the vibe. He loved the action. He loved new inventions. Unlike Thomas Jefferson, who didn't like cities, Thomas Paine was very much at home at cities and was a bit of an entrepreneur. He did not like mobs, and this is typical of rising middle-class people in the 1700s. They distrusted mobs. They thought mobs were unruly, they were irrational, they were not dependable. Instead, Paine and others like him liked this vision of the common person who read, who pondered, who thought, and many of Thomas Paine's writings were aimed at that kind of audience. So you can see Benjamin Franklin here. He was in England before the Revolution, and this is how Thomas Paine got to our country through Franklin, whom he met, and when he came to the United States, he was in Philadelphia. And it was not uncommon at that time for people to be critical of King George III of England. And when Paine took up his pen against the king, that was not unusual. So here's our event. January 10, 1776, Thomas Paine published Common Sense, which explained why it would be better for the American colonists to be independent from England, and the writing was aimed at the common person, not the intellectual or the politician, and it was a real hit. It was reprinted many, many times. It spread all over the colonies and had a big influence on the American people. He published The American Crisis when the Revolution started. This is where we get the great line, "These are times that try men's souls." And he was particularly struck by how poorly equipped the army was, and Washington had all his guys read this. Well, when the French Revolution started in 1789, here's the fall of the Bastille, Paine was back in Europe, and in the context of the French Revolution, he wrote this, The Rights of Man, because that was a big topic of discussion. And he pushed this idea of rights to really kind of a modern idea, where he talked about child education and old age pensions. And here's the guillotine and the reign of terror during the French Revolution, and this reinforced for Thomas Paine that you can't trust the mob because the mob is irrational. He also wrote a book called The Age of Reason. This is very much in tune with the Enlightenment, but he pushed some of his ideas quite far. Now, he was a deist. Deists pictured God as kind of this force up in the sky who didn't do much, but Paine was much more outspoken in his criticisms of traditional Christianity. So when he died in 1807, he was very unpopular. Very few people went to his funeral. Here's a marker where his body probably was in New Rochelle, New York, but it got moved. And in the 1830s, there was a bit of a resurgence for Thomas Paine. They would be birthday celebrations for him, but then he faded again. And for a long time was simply thought of as, oh yeah, he's that guy who really criticized Christianity. But Abraham Lincoln liked the writing of Thomas Paine, particularly that Thomas Paine wrote for the common person, and this was very much consistent with Lincoln's own approach, the way he communicated. Well, if you ever get to Thetford, England, northeast of London a bit, there's a statue to Thomas Paine. And if you're thirsty and you need a pint, go across the street to the pub called The Rights of Man and reflect on Thomas Paine, who had a big influence in the American Revolution, but then faded into obscurity for a while.